All right, and we're live. Good evening, everybody, and good morning to those of you viewing from other countries. My name is Tara Linney. I'm a part of Coding Connect, which is a movement to get more educators on board with getting coding into the curriculum for their classes. We have a special guest with us this evening. His name is Brian Aspinall. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
Yay! So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So Brian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe what you were like as a kid?
Um, as a kid, I guess I was quiet. If you ask my grade 3 teacher, she said I was a little bit introverted and should probably make some friends doing some extracurriculars. But I guess I came out of my shell a little bit in high school.
Okay, and what were some of your interests?
You know what? I started in high school outside of a few sports. My interests were at that time HTML. I did my first ever high school website back in 1994, I guess. It was my first paid job, really. Um, and it kind of went from there, I guess. That was my biggest hobby was creating on the computer.
Awesome. So what type of computer specifically?
It was a Pentium 2, I remember.
That's awesome. So when you created your school's website, did you also like update it or did you just like create the framework for it?
Created, you know what? It started as a school project. We had to create a poster for a grade 10 media studies class, and I asked that teacher if I could make a website instead of a poster, and she allowed it. And there was another teacher in the building who actually ran a spirit wear clothing business on the side. So he caught wind of it, and he asked if I could make a website for his business, and then the principal caught wind of it, and by the end of grade 11, I think I had a little web portfolio, a paid web portfolio in the mid 90s, and I was updating it until I graduated grade 12, or actually grade 13 back then.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. So it started off small and then kind of snowballed into something big, like
It,
job-like.
and yes, and that's I ended up in university doing that because of that. I owe a lot to that grade 10 teacher that allowed me to make that website for that project.
Nice. So we see that you are now an educator, but you started off as a computer science major. Can you explain that?
I went into computer science and I graduated computer science and I was in the co-op program, so I worked in the industry for a little while. But keep in mind this wasn't ready for cubicles. It was cubicles and deadlines in those days and long nights, and I just wasn't prepared for that. And so I went to teachers college, and now I guess I've found that niche of being able to measure, I guess. But I had always planned on being a teacher a little bit. In grade 9, my guidance counselor made me fill out one of those surveys, and I had put, wanting to be a teacher back in full circle.
Wow, very cool. Very cool. Um, so I see that we have a few viewers. Viewers, if you have any questions, feel free to use our question and answer app, and then we'll get to your questions throughout the show. Um, so now let's talk about coding. Can I just say that what you did on Twitter with the CSK8 hashtag last Wednesday, and I will remember it because it was the night of a Thanksgiving party, um, was amazing. Where did you get such an idea to actually like code in real time and walk people through your process?
tune in to and participate in Twitter chats. Um, to me, they seem to be these big ideas of who can say the smartest thing in 140 characters, but we're all thinking the same thing. It's talking about history. Let's try and do, as far as I know, the first ever live tutorial Twitter chat. So to I know one. Correct me if I'm, but I thought coding. There are a lot of educators that want to actually try it themselves. So instead of having them tune in to read about the buy-in, I mean they've already bought in. That's why they're
Sorry, you froze a little there at the end. Can you talk about that buy-in piece with educators again?
yeah. Sorry. I was saying that I think that the buy-in for teachers, if they're going to attend the Twitter chat to look at how and why to code in school, they've already bought into it as probably a good thing. So I thought let's take it to the next for professional development for anybody that wants to follow along.
Very cool. And I also noticed yesterday that you had a student who was participating in your CSK8 hashtag CSK8 chat. Can you explain how that happened?
Actually, I can, and he's not my student. He's
Ah,
actually a student in my wife's class, and it was his idea. About 2 weeks ago, he was throwing around the idea of starting his own Twitter chat. So I asked him to come along and be a co-moderator. And just before 8 o'clock last night, I sent him a private message and said, "Do you want to go full force?" And he did, and he wanted to, and he nailed it. And I thought, you know what? How cool is it that not only do we have this grade 7 student teaching coding, but he's doing it through last night was making an e-greeting card. So media literacy, the fundamentals of math are right in there to create this animation, and empowering him to teach adults something he knows and he's passionate about, which is where I was back in grade 10 when I was allowed to make that website.
that's awesome. So, what age levels have you worked with when it comes to coding in the classroom? Do you start with kindergarten? Do you focus on like middle school or junior high?
Nowadays, kindergarten, when I started, it was what we call intermediate, so grades 7 through 12, or 7 through 10, and then senior students in grades 11 and 12. But with these apps that keep popping up and this movement and everything else, there are schools in our district that have coding buddies. So we've got senior and intermediate students buddying up with primary students to code animations.
That's awesome. And when it comes to coding, so we'll talk a little bit about the subjects in a little while, but when it comes to coding, what do you what do you use? I mean, are they doing unplugged activities? Are they doing plugged in activities?
There, it depends. I have passion projects in my classroom, so there's a little bit of opportunity for students to explore their passions and their creativity. If I was coding some concepts, then we use a lot of the block coding like Scratch because they don't lose focus of the task by worrying about syntax. When
Right.
it's drag and drop and it's Lego, they can focus on the math concept. If I was teaching computer science, I would make them write syntax. But because it's numeracy and literacy, we use the block coding.
Can you kind of, for our viewers, explain what syntax is when it comes to coding?
Uh, syntax spelling.
Oh, Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. Syntax to computer science is
Sorry, one more time.
I'm going to type it.
Awesome.
Syntax,
Okay.
syntax to CS is like, oh, my caps locks are on. Syntax is spelling to language arts.
Oh, okay. So syntax to computer science is like spelling to language arts. So it's like the building blocks behind what makes it it.
Yes.
Awesome. Nice, very nice analogy as well. I think that this will help a lot of educators to see like how just syntax is like the building blocks behind computer science. Um, Now, how do you differentiate between computer science and coding and programming? Like these are a lot of different words that are thrown around, which essentially mean the same thing, or do they?
I don't I don't believe they do. And the nature of my background, true coders and true developers, they write code into a finished executable program. I think the word coding has become a little bit buzzy, and that's okay. But to drag and drop snippets of commands and to call it coding, maybe that's coding nowadays. It's not coding what I know it as traditionally, but maybe, in 2015 that can be what we call coding because we have the fundamental tools already in place. We don't worry about machine language anymore. So maybe syntax was the 20th century.
Okay. Well, when it comes to coding, can you tell us some specific ways that you integrate coding into your classroom curriculum? Let's start with focusing on the math component.
Sure. I use we use coding to bring out and work to life. We rotate polygons, we reflect polygons. Sure. We bring traditionally rote and repetitive textbook problems to life. So probability simulators and animations, rotations, reflections, and translations that you would otherwise look at in a textbook, and you have to infer a lot of information from that textbook, and then bringing it to life.
Okay. Can you explain like the concept behind your Pythagorean theorem example, the 4-minute YouTube video that you posted the other day?
Sure, we make apps like that are very numerical driven because I feel that the formulas are the byproduct. So if a student can code me an app that will tell me the hypotenuse based on user input, they're going to learn that to the process of coding that application. If I want them to memorize that formula.
Which makes sense. So it's like a way for a platform for students to show what they know, but then also learn this cool new skill.
Yes, I believe that coding today is just another tool like making a PowerPoint or a presentation. Coding is just another way to do it. It does have an added layer of critical thinking and problem solving and things like that, but it's another tool in elementary school to demonstrate concepts. In a science classroom, you could have students program the behavior of particles in the solid, liquid, and gas state. And they would have to understand how those particles behave before they could write an algorithm to make them move on the screen.
So in your particle example, what would students use, like what platform would they use to make this happen, like to demonstrate this? Because I know that I work with a teacher who's trying to figure out how to get students to understand element relationships and the bonding that happens and how to demonstrate that knowledge. So can you give an example of like maybe a platform that can be used to do such a thing?
Sure. We are big advocates for Scratch by MIT. It is a Flash-based program, so a PC is probably the best. But because it's a cloud-based platform, students are able to save their work and they can access it anywhere. And it is blocky, it is drag and drop, but they can add sprites and they can share it. And I can then embed it into my class website and show parents and show colleagues and show everybody else some of the finished products that these students are able to create.
That's very cool. Um, let's see, when it comes to coding, so we've already talked about math and science, and I think that those are the automatics that people think of when they think of coding. But how do you see coding something that can be integrated into the English language arts curriculum?
I think that coding it lends itself naturally to procedural writing. So whether you're writing code and porting game app in hand. Did you get the piece about instructables?
No?
I think that writing code in Scratch is procedural writing upon itself. But if you wanted students to create a game, they could write instructables on how to play it. They could write opinion pieces on why their game is better than the next person. But if you wanted them to actually code for literacy, it ties in very nicely to media. If they're coding an animation or a greeting card or a music video or something like that. If you wanted students to create a comic strip or a graphic organizer, coding allows it to be interactive. You could have students code a choose your own graphic organizer where you as the user gets to determine if the character is going to go to the mall or if the character is going to go to school that day or to a friend's house. And then the student as a coder has to create all those scenarios. So it's no longer sure we add that third dimension of spatial awareness and critical thinking. So the students have to map out what that's going to look like in a language arts class.
Can you repeat that part about it's no longer a what?
I lost you there. I think it was when I was talking about it's no longer linear in nature.
Okay.
If, if we had students traditionally create a comic strip or a graphic novel, they're very linear in nature, frame, frame, frame. But when you implement coding, it becomes the user gets to decide I'm going this way, and then I'm going to follow those frames. And so that third dimension of the spatial awareness among our students comes into play. They have to factor in what's it going to look like if my user decides to go this way in a comic strip.
Which makes sense. Like I've seen a lot of students utilize perspective, like putting themselves in the perspective of the actor or the sprite in order to control it. Um, and speaking about perspectives, what are some ways in which coding can be integrated within like a social studies curriculum? You know, like when students are learning about communities and geography and things of that nature. How do you see it fitting in there?
Uh, in a multitude of ways. You could have students code review games if you wanted them to create or develop something. If they had to, if it was about retaining some facts about the community, some of the memorization skills that we seem to forget about sometimes, students could code applications or flashcards or ad libs or other types of review, or they could just create animations to support some of the things that happen in the geography or social studies world. They could recreate, the War of 1812 or something like that, and have kind of a script that goes alongside that happened. So it's kind of a recount, I guess.
Hmm. So I read on one of your bios that you've done app creating with your students. Can you explain more about that?
Yep, sure. It started with Twidgicate back in 2009. Back then, I had a grade 8 classroom that said, we really want to use social media, and you're the computer guy. And at that time, Twitter was blocked at school by firewalls. And I had always talked about what it meant to be a good digital citizen in those days. And they said, well, why couldn't we make something like it? And Twidgicate was born. So since then, I've got about 5 web apps under my belt that have all been created to solve a problem in our classroom. Like Scrawler is an alternative to Google Drive
And how do you spell
for
that again?
non-GAF districts.
Okay.
It's also WLAR.
Okay. And
So
we'll post these links at the end. Sorry.
it's kind of a GAF alternative for primary. Google Drive is pretty intense if you're 7 years old.
It can be.
Oh, it definitely can be. So Scrawler was created as an alternative for students that don't have an email address. Anybody can use it. As a teacher, you just add.
Well, and what do you use? How did Sketchlot come about?
To how the heck can we do math on a tablet in a school that's not one-to-one, so we have to share these devices, so I don't want to save my work to it because it could get deleted. Sketchlot became a cloud-based whiteboard app. And let me say that I'm done with Sketchlot. Scrawler is also a whiteboard app. It is Sketchlot, but it also has the Word doc component to it as well. So Scrawler is your word processing like Google Drive, but it's also your web-based whiteboard app like and explain everything. It currently doesn't record, but the same features where you get to draw with a stylus on the tablet, and when you click save, the teacher gets a copy in the cloud.
And what is this cloud? No, we won't get into that question. So you've been programming for most of your life then. Um, what has been your favorite programming language? Like I'm sure that like you've seen Ruby come on the scene and Python and things of that nature. So what language did you start with and what's been like your most favorite to use?
I started with Java. Sun Microsystems was a big sponsor at my university. They sponsored our labs, so we were a Java school, and everything I did in university was Java. I'm a web guy now, so it's a lot of PHP and a lot of JavaScript, and some SQL on the back end. But I'm strictly a web guy these days.
Very cool. Um, And when it comes to students learning, so they should start with like block-based so that they understand the logic more so than the syntax. But why is it important for us to, why is programming a skill that's important for all students to learn? And should all students be learning how to program?
I definitely believe that all students should be learning how to program in some capacity, not just to use the technology they have, but to be able to edit and create on it and understand how it works. It's like if you're going to drive a vehicle, you're going to want to know how to change a tire, check your oil, and check your transmission fluid. So coding is much the same as that analogy, but it also allows for the collaboration. It also allows for the problem solving and the resiliency and the critical thinking and the soft skills that are very hireable. Coding allows for students to develop the skills that they will require in their working world. Resiliency, perseverance, initiative, collaboration.
I think that's really empowering that in education, like we need to focus on what the big picture is instead of like what's on the test. So thank you. That's great input. Um, as far as like advice or suggestions that you have for teachers who want to incorporate programming into their curriculum, but I mean, have any reason from it's scary, they're not a math person, they've never done this before, what advice do you give?
Um, I would say it's okay to let go. It's okay to be a co-learner. I don't know every single language there is out there, and it's okay to learn alongside my students. Try this tool and let's see what we can do and let's play and let's have some fun and let's drive this learning together instead of that top-down approach. Um, let's go through the motions together and then problems that were rations. I can model as the educator how to overcome those barriers and continue with the process.
Which that definitely makes sense. So, speaking of speaking of barriers in education that students face, what are some like great things that you've seen happening when a student learns how to code? Like, have you had any like major success stories, like maybe like the quiet student is now speaking up or anything of that nature?
Even further than that, students with learning disabilities, students with autism, students with anything else that might be a barrier, who traditionally, the paper pencil system has not worked for them, are now being successful. They're able to manipulate on the screen and record audio and just demonstrate their understanding of some of the math concepts or literacy concepts, and the differentiated instruction is built in naturally through this technology. Instead of me having to give a different worksheet for a different student, when we just sit there and say, we're going to make this app, one student might just code what a solid particle behaves like, where the next student might code what liquids and gas particles behave like, all in the same application. Instead of just filling in, labeling this as a solid on a piece of paper like we've traditionally done it, I guess.
Well, and that makes sense. When it comes to like your students who are like academically higher, have you noticed any differences in them versus students that maybe struggle in academics?
I think a lot of the times the students who are really excellent academics strive and achieve no matter what. Sometimes they have that resiliency and that innate ability to want to be successful regardless of the task. They really take to coding because it's something different and incredibly challenging, and they sometimes they want to feed up above and beyond code. I think that our academic students sometimes will succeed regardless of the task you throw at them, and I think they accept the challenge that coding has to offer, and they want to go above and beyond the parameters of a few lines of code. whether you give the highly academic student a worksheet, a test, or the option to code, they're quite often just going to do well regardless of the medium. That's the nature of who they are, and coding offers more challenging opportunities than some of the paper pencil tasks.
That's pretty awesome. It's like a different outlet for students to be able to show like what they know. Um, when it comes to teachers, so if you still have teachers who are like hesitant or maybe like want to get connected to the right people or the right resources and maybe want to learn how to code themselves, what suggestions do you have for those teachers?
Twitter. If you are not on Twitter as an educator, you are quickly becoming illiterate. If you don't know what a hashtag is, that's a problem. If we got into teaching as lifelong learners, then this might be something you want to pursue. Twitter chats, and not just mine at CSK to 8, but there are other ones too. The code is a great place to start just to get your feet wet and learn alongside students. If you're looking for a list of coding resources by age group, I've begun to compile it because I do get this question a lot. So I've started to compile a list by age group on my professional blog, and I can type that for you so people can hit. And they're not all iOS apps. They're not all Android apps. Some of them are web-based. But if you hit brianaspinall.com, there's a Learn to Code section. There's got to be 40-plus tools on there now, and it just keeps growing on a daily basis.
Awesome. Well, speaking of the Hour of Code, what are your plans for the Hour of Code?
Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing?
My students have coded probably 40 hours already since September. I've got apps on my website that they've created. The Hour of Code is great. I really do think the Hour of Code is a place to get your feet wet. The problem for me is coding just to code. We don't say, let's do an hour of PowerPoint and then make slides. There needs to be a reason we're coding.
Which is logical. It makes sense. And you've provided a lot of great examples tonight for how you can code to support math concepts and language arts ones, and how you can like create apps and things of that nature. Let's see. So let's take a quick poll real quick. Well, not a poll, but let's turn to our audience and see if we have any questions. Okay. How long do you think that it takes a student to like kind of understand what it's like to learn how to code? So I know that like a lot of times students get frustrated, but what are some tactics that like you would suggest for kind of working through that frustration and working through that iteration process?
I welcome the frustration. I believe that's part of the learning process. If you're not being or a few individuals feeling frustrated and how to overcome it, I think is incredibly important. I think that I'm going back to the soft skills of grit and resiliency. Those are incredibly important, and coding allows for somebody to develop those skills. The real beauty of having students write code is the real-time feedback. Their program works or it doesn't work. They don't need me a week later to tell them if they did it right or not. It's on demand and it's on the spot. And when it doesn't work, they're going to seek out the resources to find out why and what they have to do to make it work. Sorry for the dog.
It's all good. What are your thoughts on like pair programming? I know that it's something that like big companies do, but how do you see like first can you explain pair programming and then also explain like maybe how it can be used in the classroom if it's something that you're a proponent of?
Oh, can you define that for me?
Oh, so pair programming is basically where you have like two individuals and you have one computer. And so one person operates as the driver, and the driver is the one who's on the computer actually putting the code in. And then the other person is the navigator who's giving directions and kind of troubleshooting through the process. So is pair programming a technique that you've used in your coding lessons with your students? Or is it something that just kind of happens naturally?
Both. I do it in my own world. The apps that I've made, I can't say I've done every line of code on my own. I've been the driver and I've been the big ideas person, but I've also had other people involved in that process. I think it's important that students explore these different roles. Some kids just want to be code monkeys and just want to write code all the time, and that's okay. And some kids want to be the big ideas people, and allow somebody else to actually put their ideas in practice. And I think it's incredibly valuable to provide the opportunity for students to see all of those, especially in elementary school. Where I'm from in Ontario, our students get streamed into two or three streams to navigate, determine that stream in secondary.
Sorry, can
Here
you
in
repeat that part
Ontario,
again? Thanks.
sure. Here in Ontario, we have two streams and then a third and fourth streams. And to provide students the opportunity in elementary school to figure out if I'm the driver, the navigator, or the big ideas person, it really helps them dream they want to go into for a paper pencil assignment. Coding allows them to figure out if they're the tactile learner, the ideas person that wants to ask somebody else to implement the idea, and things like that.
Awesome. So it's like an opportunity for them to find themselves.
Before they start picking high school courses, yes.
Cool. So what areas have you seen, especially up in Canada, as far as like that require coding as like a prerequisite for like a job or anything like that? Is there anything that you've read or heard about that requires coding?
Not that I've seen in a specific job description, but I think we are in a world where not too far off, it should be an expectation that I'm going to use teaching as an example, or something like HTML is an expectation, and that a teacher rather, is obligated to have some sort of website in the future that they have to update on their own. And that's just the nature of the beast, and that's the expectation of the job. So I think that ideology lends itself to a lot of careers. I'm using teaching as an example because it's what I know, but to not have a teacher be expected to have an online presence in the next 5 years is its generations.
Okay, that makes sense. Like you have to have the knowledge behind the skill to develop like the end product. Um, let's see. So before we conclude, let's double check and see if we have any questions from our audience. No, we have a silent audience. Okay. Do you have any like last things that you want to add for any of our viewers out there as far as like either words of advice or encouragement?
It can be, yeah, I do. It can be daunting. It can be incredibly overwhelming, and that's okay. It's okay to take the risk. It's okay to be afraid. All you are doing is modeling what it means to be a human being, and your students, you will create such a rapport with them if you allow the opportunity to try something new and you do it on your own in their presence. And if coding is it may not be coding. Learn to play a musical instrument. Coding just is very trendy right now, and it is an opportunity to try something new and to be creative, but it is no different
It's no different than what?
Learning to play the piano.
Very cool. And you could learn how to play the piano like through coding too, and like program your own piano that does like this whenever you press that. Okay.
That's true. Rock band.
Oh yeah. Now, 200 extra points if you know who created GarageBand and what the coding is that's being used behind GarageBand.
I have no idea.
Yeah, me either. All right. Well, do one last check. All right. So, I guess that's all we have for tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of our show. Um, we're like really excited to kind of get this off the ground. We've got like a lot of stuff that Coding Connect is like trying to get in the works, is trying to get coding to be a part of the curriculum like everywhere because it's an important skill, not just for the future, but for the iteration process. So thank you so much for being a part tonight, and I hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you.